All right, let's dive into Pisa. He sent us tons of stuff, articles, blogs, even some really deep historical dives. And it seems like there's so much more to this city than just its famous tower.
Yeah, you really want to go beyond the tourist traps, huh?
Absolutely. Unearth those hidden gems. The stories most tourists miss. I mean, you even sent over engineering reports about the tower itself.
Well, it looks like you found some pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah. And it seems like you're especially curious about, I don't know, the city's, its architecture.
And its history?
Of course. Let's get started.
All right. Jumping right in, what's immediately fascinating is that your research suggests Pisa might have a bit of a leaning problem. Well, literally.
Oh, you're talking about the Leaning Tower, right? I mean,
Yeah.
everyone knows about that.
Well, yes. But it seems like Pisa's leaning problem goes beyond just one tower.
Wait, are you telling me there are more leaning towers in Pisa?
Oh, absolutely. Pisa boasts not one, but three leaning towers.
Three.
Yep. You've got the Leaning Tower of Pisa, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but also the bell tower of the Church of San Michele degli Scalzi
San Michele degli Scalzi.
and the tower of the Church of San Nicola.
Okay, so two more leaning towers in one city. What are the odds?
It is pretty remarkable. And what's even more remarkable is that San Michele degli Scalzi actually leans more than the famous tower.
Seriously?
A whole 5 degrees compared to the Leaning Tower's 3.97 degrees.
Wow. That's a noticeable difference.
And San Nicola is also leaning, though, to a more modest degree of 2.5 degrees.
So all three towers are kind of, off kilter.
Yeah. This unstable ground beneath Pisa has certainly left its mark. And it makes you wonder how many other structures might be slightly off kilter.
Yeah, like the whole city's just kind of, gently tilting.
It does make you wonder. And this brings us to another curiosity you've unearthed about Pisa, the location of its most famous square, Piazza dei Miracoli. Most cities develop around their central square, but Pisa seems to have done things a bit differently.
Okay, so Piazza dei Miracoli, home to the Leaning Tower, the cathedral, and other iconic structures, isn't actually in the heart of the city?
Nope. It was intentionally built outside the city walls.
That's unexpected. Why would they build their most important religious center outside the city walls? Wasn't that risky?
Well, there are a couple of theories about this. Some historians propose that it was a deliberate display of power. Pisa, at its zenith, was a dominant maritime republic, controlling trade routes and wielding a powerful navy.
So they were like, we're so powerful, we don't need walls.
Precisely. They might have felt so secure in their strength that protecting their religious center wasn't a priority.
That's a bold statement.
It is. But others suggest a more practical reason. The piazza, with its grand structures, simply wouldn't have fit within the existing city walls.
Makes sense. You can't really squeeze a leaning tower into a tight space, can you?
Not easily.
But wait a minute, I was reading a blog post you sent that mentioned something about Roman ruins beneath the piazza. Does that lend credence to either of these theories?
It certainly adds another layer to the story. The discovery of Roman ruins, including temples directly beneath the cathedral, suggests that the site has held religious significance for centuries, even before the current buildings were erected.
So it was a significant site long before the Pisan Republic's rise to power.
Interesting. But, okay, you're not going to believe this.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, Piazza dei Miracoli wasn't always called Piazza dei Miracoli.
You're right. It was initially known as Piazza del Duomo. A pretty straightforward name, simply
Hmm.
meaning Cathedral Square.
Exactly. But its current name, Meadow of Miracles, has a more poetic, almost mystical origin. It was the poet Gabriele D'Annunzio in the early 1900s who was so captivated by the piazza's beauty that he dubbed it Prato dei Miracoli in one of his novels. The name caught on and has stuck ever since.
And it's not just a pretty name. D'Annunzio, with his keen eye for symbolism, likely chose Meadow of Miracles because the piazza houses the key structures for a religious life, the baptistry representing birth and spiritual rebirth, the cathedral symbolizing life itself, the tower serving as a call to prayer and faith, and finally the cemetery representing death and the afterlife. Wow, I never thought of it that way. The entire piazza becomes like an allegory for the human journey. But wait, there's more. Remember how we were talking about Pisa's lean? Well, get this. The baptistry, the cathedral, and the Leaning Tower are actually positioned in a way that mirrors the stars in the constellation Aries the Ram.
It's more than just a coincidence. There's an old saying, Pisa is the ram. This connection to Aries becomes even more intriguing when you consider that Pisa and the Tuscany region in general once celebrated New Year's Day on March 25th.
March 25th. Why that date?
Because it coincides with the start of the astrological year and the time when the sun enters Aries.
So the city's layout, its nickname, and even its old New Year's Day tradition are all tied to this celestial ram. I'm starting to think there's a secret society of astrologer architects running things behind the scenes in Pisa.
Perhaps. It certainly adds a layer of mystique to this already fascinating city.
Mystique is right. Okay, so we've got leaning towers, celestial alignments. What else have you uncovered about Pisa? Okay, so we've got leaning towers, celestial alignments. What else have you uncovered about Pisa?
Well, it seems like you're really interested in Pisa's maritime history. You know how it became this naval powerhouse in the Mediterranean?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine now, looking at this relatively small city, that it was once a rival to the likes of Venice and Genoa.
Right. They controlled trade routes, had a powerful navy, brought in riches from all over the Mediterranean.
They were basically the New York City of their day, weren't they?
That's a great analogy, and all that wealth is reflected in their architecture.
Uh,
The Leaning Tower itself is a testament to that ambition.
so the tower wasn't just built because they liked things a little tilted.
Not exactly.
It was a status symbol, a way of showing off their wealth and power.
Precisely. One of the articles you shared from Monitor magazine argues that the very decision to build the tower was likely tied to Pisa's ambition as a maritime power. It was a way of, flexing their muscles, announcing their presence on the world stage.
Like, hey world, look at us. We're so rich and powerful we can build ridiculously fancy towers that might end up leaning a bit. But the tower wasn't just a vanity project, right? Didn't it also have a practical purpose?
Of course, the Leaning Tower, like most bell towers, housed bells that played an important role in the city's religious and civic life.
Oh, right. The bells.
They were used to mark the hours, call people to prayer, and even announce important events.
And those bells weren't just little dinnelings, were they? They were massive.
They are quite impressive.
Yeah.
The Leaning Tower has 7 bells in total,
7.
each tuned to a different musical note,
Wow.
and some of them weigh over 3,600 kilograms.
3,600. That's like the weight of a small car.
It is.
Imagine being the bell ringer responsible for those. You'd need some serious muscle.
I can't even imagine. But I guess they didn't have Twitter back then. So giant bells were the way to go for getting people's attention.
Makes sense. So did each bell have a specific use? Or were they just ringing them randomly all day?
Each bell had its designated purpose. For example, Pasquaretta was rung on Easter Sunday,
Pasquarich.
while San Ranieri, also known as the traitor, was rung to announce executions, specifically those of individuals condemned for treason.
The traitor. Yikes. That must have been a chilling sound.
It must have.
So these towers, despite their grandeur and imposing presence, were really interwoven with the daily lives of the people.
Absolutely. They weren't just isolated monuments, but active participants in the rhythm of the city.
They marked time, announced celebrations and tragedies, called people to prayer. They were an integral part of the cityscape, both physically and symbolically.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But speaking of time, let's talk about the construction of the Leaning Tower itself. It didn't exactly go up overnight, did it?
Oh, no, not at all. I read that it took almost 200 years to build.
It's true. Work began in the 12th century and wasn't completed until the 14th century. And let's not forget, this was a time of constant warfare and political instability.
Right. Pisa was almost constantly at war with its neighbors Genoa, Lucca, Florence.
Exactly. It must have been challenging to focus on a massive construction project with all that going on.
It's like trying to build a house of cards in a wind tunnel. No wonder it took so long. But it wasn't just the political climate that caused delays, was it? Wasn't there also the whole, leaning issue?
Ah, yes, the lean. The tower's construction was far from a smooth process. There were long pauses, redesigns, attempts to correct the lean. It was a constant battle against gravity, unstable soil, and political turmoil.
Sounds chaotic.
It was.
And yet, despite all that, it's still standing.
That's pretty amazing, considering how precarious its situation seemed for so long. In fact, I recall reading that the tower's lean actually helped it survive, particularly during earthquakes. Is that true?
It might sound counterintuitive, but yes, it's true. The Leaning Tower's height, its stiffness, and the soft ground it's built on all combine to create a unique dynamic. During earthquakes, the tower doesn't resonate with the ground motion in the same way a perfectly vertical structure would.
So it's kind of like those inflatable punching clowns that wobble but never fall down.
Exactly.
It's a bit ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
A structure famous for its instability is actually more stable because of that very instability. It is. It's a fascinating example of how sometimes flaws can become strengths. The Leaning Tower's ability to withstand earthquakes is well documented. It's survived at least 4 major earthquakes since the 13th century.
Wow. That's impressive. It really is an architectural survivor. But didn't it have a close call back in the 1990s? I remember hearing something about the lean reaching a critical point.
Yes, in 1990, the tower was closed to the public because the tilt had exceeded 5 degrees, and engineers were seriously concerned about its stability.
So it was really on the verge of collapse.
There's a real fear that it could collapse.
Wow.
A team of international experts was assembled to try and stabilize the structure. It was a massive undertaking that lasted for over a decade.
So they were like the Avengers of architectural preservation.
In a way, yes. They used a combination of techniques, including removing small amounts of soil from beneath the tower's north side, a process that had to be incredibly precise and carefully monitored.
Sounds nerve-wracking.
It was. The goal was to allow the tower to settle, slightly counteracting the lean.
And I guess they must have been successful because the tower is still standing and people are still allowed to climb it.
Yes. Thankfully, their efforts were a success. The tower reopened to the public in 2001 with a reduced lean and a renewed lease on life.
It's amazing to think that they managed to stabilize this iconic structure without altering its appearance. It still leans, of course, but now it's a controlled lean.
It's a testament to human ingenuity and our ability to find solutions to seemingly impossible problems.
Hmm.
We took something seemingly flawed on the verge of disaster and not only saved it, but ensured its longevity for future generations.
It's a story of perseverance, really. But speaking of perseverance, there's one more detail I found about the tower that really blew my mind. Apparently, the way the tower leans and the way the sun hits it actually helps to stabilize the structure.
It does sound counterintuitive, but it's true. The tower leans to the south-southeast. As the sun moves across the sky each day, it heats up the south side of the tower, causing it to expand slightly.
De-expand.
Yeah, even though this expansion is tiny, it's enough to pull the tower ever so slightly back towards the north.
So the sun is like a personal trainer for the Leaning Tower, giving it a daily workout and keeping it in shape.
You could say that. And this phenomenon has likely played a role in the tower's survival over the centuries. If it had leaned in the opposite direction, the sun's heat would have actually worsened the tilt, potentially leading to its collapse long ago.
Wow, that's incredible. Who would have thought that the sun, this massive celestial body, could be so intimately involved in the fate of a single flawed tower?
It's amazing, isn't it? It makes you realize how interconnected everything is.
It does. And this interconnectedness is evident in another aspect of the Leaning Tower story, its connection to one of history's most famous scientists, Galileo Galilei.
Oh, Galilei.
The Leaning Tower is said to be the site of one of his most famous experiments, the one where he supposedly dropped two objects of different masses to demonstrate that they fall at the same rate. It's a classic image, Galileo at the top of the tower challenging centuries of accepted scientific dogma. It's almost too perfect, isn't it?
It is a compelling image, and the story has certainly become part of the Leaning Tower's lore. However, historians debate whether the experiment actually took place there. Some argue that Galileo might have conducted this experiment elsewhere, or that the story was embellished over time.
That might be more legend than fact.
Perhaps. But even if the exact details are uncertain, the association between Galileo and the Leaning Tower is powerful. The tower, with its defiance of gravity, becomes a symbol of challenging accepted truths, of pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
It's a reminder that progress often comes from questioning what we think we know and daring to lean into the unknown. And that, I think, is a fitting metaphor for our exploration of Pisa itself, a city full of surprises, contradictions, and a willingness to lean into its own unique character.
It's funny, isn't it? We think of the Leaning Tower as this mistake, this architectural oops.
Yeah, but there's actually a plaque inside the Leaning Tower commemorating Galileo's supposed experiment.
Really?
It's as if even if the story isn't entirely accurate, it's become so interwoven with the tower's identity that it's now inseparable. It's like the tower itself embodies that spirit of scientific inquiry, that willingness to question, to experiment, to push the boundaries of what we think is possible.
Exactly.
Speaking of pushing boundaries, we spent a lot of time talking about the Leaning Tower, but it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The entire Piazza dei Miracoli, you've got the cathedral, the baptistry, the monumental cemetery, all architectural marvels in their own right.
They really showcase Pisa's prominence and influence during the Middle Ages.
Right, like the cathedral. It's a stunning example of Romanesque architecture, that grand, awe-inspiring style that was all the rage in Europe in the 11th and 12th centuries, those massive rounded arches, the thick walls, the intricate carvings. It's like stepping back in time.
The Romanesque style was all about conveying a sense of power and permanence. The use of heavy stone, the sturdy construction, the imposing scale, these were all deliberate choices meant to evoke a sense of awe and inspire religious devotion.
And the cathedral in Pisa is a prime example of this style at its finest. And then there's the baptistry, that perfectly circular building.
Right, yeah.
I remember reading about its incredible acoustics. If you stand in the center and make a sound, it echoes and reverberates all around you. It's like an acoustic marvel.
It's true. The acoustics of the baptistry are truly remarkable. The circular shape and the smooth marble interior create this unique sonic environment where sound waves bounce around in fascinating ways.
I've also read that it's the largest baptistry in Italy,
It is,
which, knowing Pisa's penchant for grand gestures, makes total sense.
indeed. And we can't forget the Camposanto Monumentale, the monumental cemetery.
Oh, right. Summit.
It's enclosed by these beautiful arcaded walls and houses, an incredible collection of Roman sarcophagi, medieval frescoes, and even soil from Golgotha.
Wait, hold on. Did you just say soil from Golgotha, as in the site of Jesus' crucifixion?
It did.
How on earth did that end up in Pisa?
That's a story for another deep dive, perhaps.
What it?
But its presence speaks volumes about Pisa's historical connections, its reach across the Mediterranean.
Wow. So we've gone beyond the Leaning Tower, explored the wonders of Piazza dei Miracoli, delved into Pisa's maritime history, and even touched on the legacy of Galileo. It's amazing how much this one city holds, how many layers of history are woven into its streets and its very soil.
It's a reminder that every place has its own unique story to tell, a story that often extends far beyond the well-known landmarks.
And it's often in those lesser-known stories, those unexpected details, that we truly discover the heart of a place.
Precisely.
What strikes me is how much our perception of a place can change when we dig a little deeper, when we go beyond the surface and explore those hidden gems. We started this deep dive with the Leaning Tower, the symbol of imperfection. But what we've discovered is a city that's rich in history, art, architecture, and even a bit of astronomical mystery.
It's a city that has embraced its imperfections, its leanings, and in doing so has created something truly unique and memorable.
So the next time you see a picture of the Leaning Tower, remember, it's not just a tower. It's a gateway to a city that's full of surprises, a city that leans into its own story and invites you to do the same. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Who knows what other secrets we'll uncover in our next adventure?